Hello, and welcome to another podcast. We think this is our fourth official podcast of Peninsula Biz Buzz. My name is Shelley Smith. I am one of your hosts. I am here as a liaison for Peninsula SHRM chapter, Society of Human Resources, and the proud owner of Premier Rapport, where everything is work culture related. And my partner in crime and the main man of the hour is Bob McKenna. Bob, I am going to kick it over to you. President, if you don't know, he's the illustrious, he hates it when I say that, illustrious leader of the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. So Bob, I'm going to let you introduce Doug today. But first, do say whatever it is you want to say this morning.
All right, welcome to PBB number 4. That's what Shelley called it the last one, PBB. Peninsula Biz Buzz number 4, and today we have with us Doug Smith of HREDA, which is Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance, better known as the Alliance. But I asked Craig Quigley about that other day, Doug, and he said, we're going to take that, we're going to steal that because we were the Alliance first.
There's a number of alliances out there.
But you are the Alliance. I've seen the good marketing campaign that's going on. So Doug came recently into the job and came from city manager at Norfolk. And I can tell you that there is a definite buzz around the Hampton Roads area because Doug is now on this job. And so it's exciting, and I think there's great things ahead. And we're going to have a little conversation this morning so you all can learn more about the great things ahead. So over to you, Shelley.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bob. So, Doug, other than us having the same last name, that's probably, we're not related in full disclosure, or at least we don't think so, right?
That's right. We don't know.
I know, we don't know. But hey, listen, everybody doesn't know maybe some fun tips about you or about you. So why don't you start by two things I'm going to throw at you. First, tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about yourself. A little bit from the past, a little bit from where you are now and the excitement behind that. And then let's just roll into telling us about what you're doing today and why we should care. Why are we listening to you?
All right. Well, I'm a Portsmouth native. I'm sitting here in downtown Norfolk, and I can literally look out the window and see the house I grew up in. And like most kids at 18, went screaming out of here and said I'd never be back, and bounced around, went to school, and was fortunate the interstate banking was taking off, and went to work for a bank down in North Carolina, and spent years in North Carolina and Georgia, and got a chance to come home and worked for First Union here in this market, and was managing 31 offices all throughout Hampton Roads, and gave me a real good sense of the region at that point, and had gotten involved in as a volunteer in Portsmouth on the Economic Development Authority over there, and frankly got a chance to change careers and get into local government, and went to work for the city of Portsmouth, and over time have been a deputy city manager in Portsmouth, in Virginia Beach. Actually, in a weak moment, ran for city council and won a seat on city council in Portsmouth, and so I've been on the elected and appointed side, and as you said, most recently have been the city manager of Norfolk, and spent 11 years with Kaufman and Knowles down the street in an economic development consulting firm, and have gotten real involved in the Alliance over the last couple of years as a board member, and we'll talk some more, but it's an organization that is really changing its mission, and we were chasing an old model, and I'll talk more about that, but joined here about 2.5 weeks ago, so been in the seat for a hot minute, but thrilled to be here. And you said one fun fact, I did my part for regionalism early on. I married a beach girl. My wife grew up in Virginia Beach and went to First Colonial, so Portsmouth boy marries beach girl in the name of regionalism.
Well, you know what? I have to. I love the accent. You can tell when people are truly the local. They know how to say Norfolk correctly. So first of all, if anybody is listening and wondering if you're the real deal local yokel, as they say, you totally are. So
Thank you.
All right. So Bob, let me kick it back over to you because you always have great questions to ask to take a deep dive into.
Okay, so Doug, can you, and you alluded to this already, but can you talk a little bit about the mission of HREDA?
Absolutely. So I may even go a little back. I think it's good to perhaps know what the mission was, and what the mission has become.
Perfect.
And I'm going to tell you that in many ways, nobody's fault, but we were chasing an old model, almost a 1980s kind of model. So we're an organization that's been around literally 50 plus years through various iterations, but have been very focused on bringing investment into the region from outside the region, working with the localities to generate leads and bring companies in. And the reality is we were still competing. The localities were still competing with one another, not sharing information adequately. And about 24 months ago, public sector, private sector really started having the conversation about the reality that economic development happens on regional boundaries. And that our region really had not bounced back from the recession the way we all hoped it would. And that if we're going to make real progress, meaningful progress, we need to collaborate. And so we've changed the mission of this organization to include that business attraction piece, but also put a real focus on business expansion. And Bob, you know this, but the reality is most of your business growth, most of your job growth comes from your existing business base. And we are now starting to nurture that, to work with the localities and in a coordinated way, and start to understand the business sectors that are here and can be successful. So our big categories, if you will, are business attraction, business retention and expansion, spending a lot of energy on what we call business intelligence, what you and I probably think of as research. What is the data that's going to support the decisions that we're going to make? And then obviously marketing and communications. And I hope we'll talk a little bit about that before we get done, because you and I are both involved in Vision 2020, which I think is real exciting and something we probably ought to spend a little bit of time on before we get out of here.
Yeah, so everything you said is like stuff I've got written down already to ask you the question. So,
good.
So this is perfect, because I could just say, Doug, just go ahead and talk for the next 15 minutes, and then I don't have to say anything. But let me just touch on a couple of things you talked about. So we were at an interregional visit down in Raleigh and Durham last week, Doug and I, and I was struck by the spirit of collaboration there, for one thing, but also the fact that the Durham and Raleigh chamber presidents, coming from my perspective, they both come from the economic development world. And I mentioned that to Doug, and I said, I think I need to be much more involved with HREDA. So this is a perfect opportunity, because HREDA is transitioning to a new director. But the organization that we have, that we jokingly refer to as the Wolf Pack, and it includes all of those organizations that have HR in their title, and except me, which has a VP in my title. But I see, the way I look at it now, you need to be the center of that. And I mean you, HREDA, need really to be the center of the Wolf Pack. And the rest of those organizations, HRUMFA, HR Chamber, Reinvent, Hampton Roads, HRPDC, HR Tech, and HRT, need to revolve around you. But I think you need to set the tone. Do you agree with that?
I do. And part of what I've talked about a lot is making ours the most connected, collaborative business community. And I think that goes along exactly the lines that you're talking about. We can't do this in silos. I think you and I we had our meeting last week with our peers, and I guess that's one Friday a month. Y'all been doing that for a long time, and the amount of information sharing that goes on about the business topics, the transportation topics, the defense topics, the more we each know about what the other one is doing, I think the better. But at the end of the day, it is about growing the economy. And I think you're right. I think we've got to play a central role in coordinating all those activities.
Yeah, so I talked to Craig Quigley yesterday and said exactly that to him. And I said, you know, we're pretty good at information sharing, so everybody knows kind of what everybody else is doing. But it sounds like you agree with me that we need to be more intentional about how we're going to work together to develop the economy and to expand businesses and bring new businesses in.
And I'll give you a great example. With my first day here, and we talked about both of these with the group last Friday. I told my team, I said, I've been involved in conversations around offshore wind for the last 10 to 15 years. And I've been very involved in conversations about the undersea cables coming in from Europe and South America and Africa eventually. And I think they are game changers. And yet, I couldn't articulate an economic development strategy around either of those topics today. And one of the things that we will do, and I think you will be a big part of helping us do that, is over the next 60 or 90 days, start to craft that strategy. So from that meeting, Bob Crum, who runs the Regional Planning District Commission, the HRPDC, agreed he would take the task force on broadband and how we leverage these undersea cables. And I would take the offshore wind. And so we're pulling smart people into the room to talk about what these opportunities look like and how we leverage them. Because there are two great examples of, if we're not careful, these cables will come into Virginia Beach and they will run up to Ashburn, Virginia, and we will be left out. And offshore wind, these turbines will get built all up and down the East Coast. They're going to get built. But if we're not intentional, we won't get the jobs to construct, install, and ultimately maintain those turbines for the next generation. And so we've got to be really intentional about how we take advantage of these opportunities.
Excellent. Shelley, you got any questions?
Yeah, I was just going to pipe in. You talked about the importance of, you wanted to talk about the marketing side of this. You said you wanted to get to that. So I actually was going to ask you, what were some of your first initiatives, and you literally just called those out. You know, you've been in, you said 14 days.
Exactly.
What are you waiting for, right?
I know.
But two things, twofold. If you could talk to us a little bit more about the marketing, but weave that inside of your overall strategy, maybe for the first 90 days, 6 months, year out, because obviously you're excited. But anything that you can share with us that is a roadmap of that, I think would be great for the viewers and listeners.
Terrific. One of the things, I probably should have said this from the start, one of the fortunate opportunities for me is that the organization had an interim executive director, president, Steve Herbert, who's a wonderful guy and had been the city manager of Suffolk and deputy city manager of Virginia Beach. And he came in and ran HREDA for 6 months and really put a lot of the foundational work in that I'm able to take advantage of. One of those things that Bob and his counterpart, Brian Stevens, and Steve and Jim Spohr from Reinvent Hampton Roads have been working on is something called Envision 2020. And Bob can probably talk more eloquently about kind of what's happened, but the gist of it is you've had a lot of involvement the last several months of trying to understand what our region is. And one of the things Bob and I heard in Raleigh, a gentleman from Duke said it. He said, you've got a great region, but what you have to do, you have to figure out what is the essence of Hampton Roads. You know, what are you and what do you want to be? And that's what this exercise around Envision 2020 is. And it's really interviewing and surveying residents, tourists, site selection consultants, business leaders, trying to understand, A, what they think of us today, but B, what they think our strengths and weaknesses are, and then how we build on those. And I think once that work is done, and a lot of people want to go straight to what should we call the region? Should we continue to be Hampton Roads? Should we be something different? And I think that's important, and we'll figure that out. But it's that groundwork that builds to who you are and what your essence is. It's going to be really important. Once that gets decided, I think our organization, because we are a marketing organization that is going outside of the region and selling our assets, I think we'll play a really key role in that process. And so I'm really fortunate in that I think a lot of groundwork has been done, and we'll get a roadmap really here in probably the next 60 or 90 days that starts to talk to us about what marketing this region should look like.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. But first of all, let me just say, so John Martin was our first guest on PBB. So we've talked to him about that. Shelley's had a couple of briefs on Envision 2020, but I think that's critical to tell our story to where, because we have all these great gifts, right? But we haven't told the story well. So that's a big part of Envision 2020. So earlier you mentioned being from this area and then thinking that you were going to go away and find your fame and fortune and independence somewhere else, and you ended up back here, you married a beach girl, and you're here. So that kind of touches on talent, right? That's why Charlotte is succeeding, and that's why one of the reasons Raleigh-Durham is succeeding is because they're attracting and retaining talent. So my three older kids have all grown up here and then moved away. So I feel like a hypocrite sometimes saying we need to keep the talent here. So can you comment on that? I mean, I think we have great universities here, so we try to retain that talent because some of them have already left home.
Yeah.
And we keep them here. So what do you think about retaining talent? And
it's again, you said it earlier. We watched down in the Triangle. They have their natural resource, if you will, is those three universities that are churning out fantastic students and great minds. But we have. I think the last number I heard was somewhere between 12 and 14,000 exiting military every year. So we've got a talent pool that is unmatched in many ways. What we've also got, what's the phrase? Companies need talent and talent needs access. I think one of the things you'll see us start to really talk about as an industry is this idea of inclusive economic growth and making sure that everyone in the region gets an opportunity to get these jobs that we're generating. So I think what we're going to end up selling is this place. And so if we can really get offshore wind and some of these other industries to take off, we're going to see the buildup in the military and the Navy spending these next 24, 36 months. That's going to give us another big jolt. And then once you have an opportunity here and you recognize what a fantastic place is, I think we'll start to pull people in. But we've got to have the jobs that make it attractive to be here. Your kids left, I suspect, in part because they found an intriguing employment opportunity somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you guys have referenced Raleigh a couple of times. Raleigh being known for the Research Triangle area itself has been years. I mean, as long as I can remember. So going back to that marketing and that branding piece and that cohesiveness, and Bob, you referencing that to the chamber presidents, I think you said were previous economic development. And again, I just think learning, to your point, learning from that. And for the listeners and the viewers, going back to Bob, I think you were very strategic and intentional with the first round of guests on here. So we've talked to all of the elements that you just referenced, and people dug that you're actually leaning into. I like, Bob, how you referenced the wolf pack. So I just think that, again, that's an intentional, and it's getting very zoomed in and intensified. And I love that, and I applaud all the efforts. And I just wanted to stop and pause. I realized, Bob, the people that you're pulling on, I'm like, I see what you're doing. It's good.
Anything else? Any closing comments, Doug? Well, let me just give you an opportunity to close about innovation and entrepreneurship. So you mentioned 12,000 to 14,000 exiting military service members, and you talked about universities. We also have this great treasure that is science, technology, and research here, and we have Jefferson Lab and NASA up here on the peninsula. So I think there's some great opportunities to tap into that for innovation and entrepreneurship. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, I think it is what has transformed many of these other regions. And I think part of what we're starting to work through is a number of things. You finally got some capital in this region that is looking to invest in these, frankly, startup companies. We're a fairly conservative culture, I think, and I think that is driven by that dependence upon the military. It is a low risk environment. A lot of defense contractors, again, low risk, but you're finally starting to see the idea that taking a risk on a business and not being successful is okay. And that's going to happen. And right before I jumped on here, I was upstairs. The top 2 floors of this building are a space called Gather. And I walked up there to meet with somebody, and it's fascinating space, and much of it is about serendipity. Who do I sort of bump into? They're up there cooking pancakes right now, and everybody's hanging out, chatting about, having a cup of coffee, and it's a fantastic environment. And so you've got some people that are really starting to create that entrepreneurial ecosystem that's so important to what we're going to do. So we have not been in that space as an organization, but you'll start to see us slip into that space. I think in the probably more in the second year than the first year, but what we're doing.
Well, and I know you said that you may be using office space at Gather Newport News, or you're going to do.
We are. That's part of what I talked to him about. I think the ability. I think it's important for us to have a presence on the peninsula to be seen. It's why I wanted to be at that breakfast you had the other day. I want people to see me. I want people to see our folks. I don't know what that looks like physically, but Gather gives me a wonderful opportunity for a nominal amount of money to have a place where my staff can go and be seen. I think there's spaces over in the new tech center that I haven't been in, but I understand is fabulous. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, that's a good segue. So Savannah Boland, if you're watching this, we're going to have you on an upcoming PBB, maybe number 5.
That'd be great.
Exactly.
So thanks for that good segue, Doug. Okay, that's about it, Shelley, right? Are we?
No, it is. We need to buzz it up. I definitely think that, Doug, we need to come back a year from now to see all the things that you've accomplished, and we can go back down memory lane in a really good way, because clearly there's lots of things that you have going on and that everybody's going to want an update for. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Again, anybody who is watching, listening, viewing, make sure you're sharing and commenting. And if you've got somebody that you know that Bob and I need to talk to, all you need to do is hit us up and we will get them on the agenda. So that's it for me. Any final comments from you, Doug?
No, listen, it's been a blast. I'll leave you with this thought. And one of my takeaways from Raleigh, Bob, was, we talk a lot about connectivity to Richmond, and there's a lot of hard work going on to create this mega region. My takeaway in Raleigh is it's going to be just as important that we start to connect to that Raleigh region, and we really start to create the transportation that allows us to not be perceived as that cul-de-sac, but really that stopping point between Richmond and Raleigh, and to tap into that talent pool that you talked about. I think there's a lot of synergy that can be developed there. So I'll leave that for a later conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Diane. Thanks for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us this morning. And I really do look forward to learning from you and working with you in the future. So thanks very much.
You got it. Thank you.